Alright guys, coming at you live with another Final Fantasy VII video. Basically, this is going to be a summary of Cloud's story that he basically tells the group in terms of what happened in Nibelheim many years ago. So we're basically going to summarize the story because it literally takes like about an hour to get through this part in terms of like telling the story appropriately. So I'm just going to do my best to summarize this next part. And of course, we're going to grab the E skill of Matra Magic at the very beginning from these two machine guys. And we're going to grab that ability to the best of our extent when they use Matra Magic like so. And now we just learned it. And that's pretty much the first E skill that you need to use to take down a bunch of monsters at the very beginning, which is actually one of the more powerful ones. So we're moving in, learning the move, and now we can actually imitate it, which is pretty handy if you ask me. And it does a lot of damage, so I would recommend getting this ability as soon as you can. So, big shot, and that should wipe them out. And you gotta defeat the enemies in order to actually get this special ability. Just letting you know. So now that we got the ability, now we gotta go to Calm. And through Calm, we actually start telling the story of how Cloud basically was like this war hero slash veteran type of deal from, and I kind of went the wrong way. It's actually over here. This is Calm. And of course, I got a lot of enemies to deal with, so it takes a little while to get there. We're just gonna run away from the motorcycle guys. Gotta get away from them eventually. There we go. So yeah. Um basically Cloud I'll let the game explain it, but Cloud was basically in a basically tough situation early on in the story. This is where we start explaining the story. But this is basically the backstory, the origin story of Cloud's war years, I suppose, because he was a war buddy with Sephiroth for many years. Um, and basically they became friends essentially, but he wasn't really much of a friend, I would say, more like an acquaintance, because this is how he started out essentially. And I don't know if you could call it a direct way to tell the story, but basically this is how he was introduced to materia and everything. So it's basically his backstory, if you will. And this is the part of this story that basically explains what their missions were, how he became part of the Shinra organization, and how he used to work for them, you know? And of course, he goes to his hometown, which is Nibelheim, and they fight monsters, just in general, like dragons and all sorts of stuff. And yeah, that's pretty much his backstory to the extent of my knowledge. There's a little bit more in here that we have to do. Um, we basically arrived to Nibelheim, like so, and now we actually have to do something in one of the houses. We actually have to play the Tifa's theme song on the piano. Just letting you know that you have to do this in disc one. I try to do it as consistently as possible, so you actually have the sheet music already prepared for getting a bunch of other stuff later. So we're going to be preparing for that. And of course, Genova is basically Sephiroth's mother, as you know, but Hojo is basically the scientist that made it all possible, you know? And of course, we meet up with a bunch of different scenarios here. Um we basically arrive at the hometown. We rest up, and I'm just trying to find Tifa's house right now because I'm trying to do a little trick for the future. And of course, I went to Tifa's house, of course, and I'm just answering the questions as much as possible here. And I did go to your room, and of course, I have trouble getting to the piano, but I am trying to play the music. So, yeah, jammed on it. That's what we're gonna do. I remember, I think. And we play the music as well as I can, even though I don't think I played it very well the first time. I think I have to play it a second time. Hold on a second. I'm trying to get this down right. Um, come on. Gotta get it right. And it's gotta be perfect. Well, it doesn't have to be perfect every single time, but I have to make sure that it plays out well in order to actually keep moving in the game. But I did put it in there, so it should be ready for later. All right, I hope. I hope it comes out right. So now we're going into the main reactor, and Tifa is basically the guide to to actually go inside the Shinra reactor that's basically located in Nibelheim. So they take a picture, a memento, if you will, because they asked for a picture. And now we're heading over to the reactor in Mount Nibble, or Nebel, or I don't know how you pronounce it. Um, Basically, they go up the bridge, and the bridge breaks. Um, and they all fall, and they survive the fall. Most of the soldiers don't. And then they find a Mako-induced fountain, and it's a very rich fountain in terms of miracle of nature. And that's basically how they start explaining that Mako energy in this particular game is basically knowledge of the ancients, if you will. So that's how they interact, and that's how they create magic skills entirely in this story. And that's when they explain Professor Gast, he was a great scientist, and how basically all this came to be. Of course, Hojo wasn't really much of the major scientist that actually Professor Gas was. He basically took over, and he wasn't really much of a scientist, but he did try. But he's a mad scientist, so it's okay. So now we're going inside the reactor. And basically, he's about to see Genova, but he doesn't do it. There's a malfunction in one of the machines, so we turn the valve, and we realize what is actually inside of the Mako reactors. This is what Hojo was doing when basically he took over Professor Gast. He basically put humans inside of the Mako reactor. So they basically are building super soldiers essentially with the Mako energy. And that's how I guess the monsters are also made inside the game. So when Sephiroth realizes this, he kind of goes off because he thinks that he's just like them. He's just like these monsters inside these cocoon, basically, reactors that are basically building Mako soldiers, essentially. So that's pretty much the backstory, but there's a little bit more. It gets a little bit more confusing because after a while, basically Sephiroth doesn't go out anywhere. He basically stays locked up inside the Shinra Mansion. This is the Shinra Mansion. They call it the Shinra Mansion because they used to live there a long time ago. And basically we go down these set of stairs like every other day. There's a bunch of stairs in Final Fantasy VII for some reason. And of course, he reads up on the history behind Genova and the Genova project. Now, He is basically a manufactured soldier, according to the records. And Professor Gas basically was responsible for all this, and so was Hojo. They basically built Sephiroth out of scratch. Like he basically realizes that everybody is against him because he basically thinks he's the last ancient. So, or one of the Cetra, really. And the Cetra are basically these ancient beings that came and they basically were wiped out by the human beings. So, and this was like 2,000 years ago, apparently, according to the records. But once he realizes this, he basically says, I'm gonna basically take down everybody because he's one of the last ancients and he wants to see his mother, which is basically Genova. So he heads on out to the reactor. Once again, we have to go back through the stairs. And basically, this is where he betrays everybody, essentially, because and basically burns down Nibelheim, apparently. And this is where we get into the turning point of another turning point in the game, where basically Sephiroth is viewed as the main antagonist at this point, according to the story. And he just basically mutilates everybody and leaves into the distance in a fiery blaze. So we go back to the reactor. A couple of things happen in here in the story. We go down a pair of stairs again, and of course, here's where Tifa comes into play because she was the guide. She doesn't appreciate that he basically mutilated all the villagers, and including her father. And basically, she goes after Sephiroth herself, and then she basically gets injured in the process. And now we're here to rescue her essentially because she's basically injured from this. And we basically put her on the sides here because, she's injured. And now we're gonna go after the main antagonist. And basically, the Genova project is basically here inside this reactor. At the time. And basically, at this point, he's basically broken down to the point where he's basically going to betray the entire planet, essentially. And yeah, this is basically the main part of the game where the antagonist is in place and he basically wants to take over for the Cetra. He believes he's the chosen one, chosen by the Cetra to actually take back the planet, according to the story. Um, Not much else to go about here. I think that's pretty much the entire story at that moment. I tried to summarize it as much as possible. It is a lot to take in. It's a lot of information. But other than that, this is basically where we're starting to head on out on our quest to go after the main antagonist, which is Sephiroth. So this is basically how we go about it going on the hero's quest, essentially. You find the quest and basically you start heading through the journey, essentially. It's basically the beginning of the quest. You get sent on the mission, which is the conflict, and then you basically start on that literary um incline of the story. Of course, we receive a PHS, which is handy, and we basically communicate with the party members, essentially. And now we're moving. And now we can save the game finally, but before I do that, I'm gonna equip the materia, the all materia back onto my characters because I didn't appreciate that gap inside that particular moment where they took it away from me, which is kind of not nice on their part. And I like to get experience for my all materia, so we're just gonna regroup here. Hopefully we get these numbers up. And that's essentially that was pretty much my summary of Cloud's story. It's a very complicated story, but it does seem to have a lot of moments where it doesn't get explained all too well, which begs the question about the story in general. But we'll get into that later. Until next time.